Hey everybody, so this is going to be part one of the chapter on authentic response. This chapter was super fun to read and super interesting because I never thought how just being yourself, knowing yourself, and being true to yourself really does play such a huge part in your career and the path that you take from a vocational standpoint. Um, so I included a few pictures of some people in the music business, more artists than managers, but who I think have done an excellent job of being themselves and knowing who they are, no matter how much backlash they've gotten from the public. And I included David Bowie, Prince, Lady Gaga, of course, and Miley Cyrus. So let's get started. So, what does it mean to be authentic and to have authenticity? Um, well, whenever you're talking about a career, it means responding to the calling, which creates authenticity in yourself. So, by doing this, you're choosing a career for yourself. You're choosing the career that's best going to use the talents that you have, not what someone else has or the talents that you wish you had, the ones that you really have, and that you know you're good at. And but whenever you're doing this, um, there's gonna be an inner voice in your head, and um, the chapter in the book calls it the ought to voice. Um, which sounds kind of weird, but what this means is phrases that you might hear when you're making a big decision, like this voice telling you you ought to get a job in a field that you have a degree in, or you ought to make as much money as you can. You ought to choose a career that's practical, and or you ought to follow your dreams. And these can really contradict each other. Like you may one minute be thinking, "Oh, I should go down this path no matter how hard it is because this is what I want to do." And then on the other hand, a voice might be telling you, "No, you need to choose a career that you know you're going to have a job in always." Which obviously with the music business is not for sure, especially with how things have been recently. So some oughts are legitimate career issues, like you should really pay attention to and prepare for, and sometimes it's just keeping you from hearing what your heart really desires. And so a little bit more on the word authentic. Um, it's defined as, I really like this definition, being actually and exactly what is claimed. So not being false or fake, being real. Okay. This chapter got really philosophical real fast, but or this section. Um, so one true self or true to self. All right, let's dive in. The idea of an unchangeable self has been debated. Um, this concept is essentially the is your true self, your core self, stable and rooted, or is it changeable depending on the situation? Um, and it's super complex because obviously we're different around different people, and we're different in different situations. So this creates a multi self. Like you're not the exact same every day, or even, you can even change throughout one day. Um, so there's been a lot of arguments that while you can change on situations, your core self never really changes. And some researchers wondered if it's possible to really ever know one's true self. Um, the multi self seems like we can change and learn new things, which, obviously we can. I'm sure we've all been through changes. And studies have determined that the self can change in particular situations, like I said before. Um, and results have been found through some research and tests that the self is pretty much both stable and changeable. So it's a little bit of both. And this one researcher named Hermira Iberas, I might be saying her name wrong, but she did this really cool study, and she found that many people who try to be true to themselves have often actually had a lot of trouble in leadership positions, um, which I thought was super interesting because you would think like people who are really true to themselves would people would want to follow them, you know. But she says leaders often like have a lot of trouble adapting to change in given situations. Um, she suggests that if you do find yourself in a leadership position, you you should try out different leadership styles, and yeah, but and she recognized that like self can be negative. She also and realized that the self can be negatively influenced by internal directives, like that voice that I talked about, like the ought to voice, like what you should and shouldn't do. But it can be directed by things like greed or narcissism, misuse of power, and self doubt. And along with those internal influences, there are also external influences, like your family and your teachers, your friends, or even things like books can be helpful, and all these things can be positive or negative influences on being true to yourself. And authenticity can also serve as a filter for what advice you should take in or what advice you should not take in. Just kind of figuring out what works for you. Like something that might be great advice for someone else might really not work for you. So you don't want to just reject every advice or every bit of help that someone gives you. Um, it's important to learn new things from people who have either been where you are um, or in your job um, or just trying to like a parent or something just trying to help you out. But you also need that filter so you know what advice you shouldn't take in. Um, and knowing your core values and who you really are will help you do this. And this one example of like being true to yourself, but also kind of like picking up or focusing on different traits in certain situations is like people who have stage personas um, or like an alter ego whenever they go on stage. It doesn't mean that they're not being authentic on stage. They're just channeling a different part of themselves so they can like interact with the crowd a certain way. And a really cool example of this is like Beyonce, whenever she would go on stage and then she turned into Sasha Fierce. Like, she's still being herself. She's not like lying or being fake. She's just focusing on these certain traits in herself and kind of to become more confident in that situation and not be as shy. And I mean, the same type of idea can be used for any leadership position or managing position. If you're kind of naturally quiet or a little more timid, then whenever you go to work, you might kind of need to just get like maybe a little fired up or something and kind of tap more into the part of you that's gonna, I mean, not be mean, but like tell people, you know, how it is, or tell people what they need to do, or just be more direct, whatever it is, you know. So, does all this about authenticity and your true self really matter? Let's see. So, being authentic has a real personal impact on yourself. Some researchers examine that authenticity by identifying um, subjective well-being and also psychological well-being. So, like to see how being authentic has influenced people in these two sectors. So, to explain that a little further, subjective well being has to do with life satisfaction, like low anxiety, low stress, like being just happy with how your life is going. And then psychological well being involves more like personal growth, positive relationships with others, and self acceptance and purpose in life. And being authentic is also linked to high self esteem. And it also means just being like honest with yourself at what your vocation, like within your vocation, like is that what you're best at? Is that career gonna bring out the traits in you that that I mean you're good at and that you should use, um, or maybe that career isn't the best for you. Maybe there's something else out there that would just be a better use for your talents. And I mean that doesn't mean you shouldn't um, push yourself and learn and achieve and go for big goals and go for that career even if it's going to be really hard to get there. That doesn't mean that at all, um, but knowing who you really are and knowing yourself is going to make it a lot easier to pick your career um, for your future. And yeah, so to kind of recap a little bit, we just talked about how being authentic really impacts your career way more than I ever thought about, for sure. Um, it also just impacts yourself personally, just being who you are. It makes you a lot more confident, and and then like what advice you should take from other people or shouldn't take from other people, and I think it just helps you in every aspect of life. But so yeah, that's pretty much it for part one. So now we're gonna move on over to part two, and Chloe's gonna take over. But thanks for listening.